This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College, and my guest today is Don Decesare, the owner of the radio station. He's my boss, and he's not used to being on the other side of the mic, or are you?
I'm not used to being interviewed, I admit that, and I certainly don't think of myself as your boss. How about we're colleagues?
Half an hour a week, you are my boss. Anyway, I'm very interested in what brought you to being the owner of a local radio station. And let's go back a little bit. You've been in Connecticut for how many years now?
Well, living in Connecticut a long time. Owning the station's almost 16 years.
16 years. And what were you doing before that?
Before that, I spent 20 years at CBS and various jobs there, starting as a writer, in the first year that I was there. And it was a very different place in those years. I'm talking about the mid-'70s.
Yeah. And
they had a particular way of bringing people on board, and they, on the news side, which is where I started, they brought people in as writers.
So I suppose I have to ask, did you know the great Walter Cronkite?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I worked with him. An accident of history, purely, that when I arrived there, still active were Cronkite, Severide, and many of the names that people know. Murrow had already passed away, but there were many of those tremendously important and wonderful journalists still working, still active, and as a young journalist I was able to work with them.
what did Cronkite teach you that you still take with you?
Oh, I don't know that he taught me anything in particular. I think the place taught me, because everybody that was working there in those years fit into the place. There was a culture there, literally. I know everybody uses that word, but there was a culture there that hasn't happened since, and I suppose never will be duplicated again. And that culture started with Murrow and was carried on through those gentlemen whose names.
So I've been paid to say that the owner of WMRD, WLIS, got his initial education at the very best place you could at the very best time, namely CBS in the late 70s, early 80s. This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, and we'll be back. This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College, and my guest today is Don Decesare, the owner of the radio station, WMRD, WLIS. I've got to ask, what are these two separate radio concerns?
Well,
I know you've melded them, but
as the FCC looks at them, yes, there are two individual radio stations licensed to two individual communities. WMRD is licensed to Middletown, WLIS is licensed to Old Saybrook. We merge them in effect and treat them as if they were one for the vast majority of what we do. There's an occasional thing here or there that we do on one station or the other, and not simultaneously. For the last more than 10 years, we've been doing virtually everything together and treating it as if it was one big radio station covering all of Middlesex County, which it does.
Before you came, we were talking about CBS. You were at CBS at their heyday.
I was.
Maybe not with Murrow, but Cronkite and Severide and those. Tell us a bit about your foreign travels with CBS.
I started out working as a writer, as I mentioned, and one thing led to another, and eventually I was promoted to producer. And at one point in the late 70s, the very beginning of the 1980s, there was a nasty little business going on in Central America involving several countries and a lot of rebellions. Of course, CBS was covering those, as were others, and they were using up people doing it. It's very difficult work, doing war zone work. First, there's the danger, obviously, but the hours of the day, they're extremely long days. The demands upon your time, the climate, all of these different factors played into exhausting people pretty quickly. As a result, at one point in time, they kind of ran out of people willing to run the facilities down in those countries. And I think out of desperation, to be honest, I don't think it was anything else, they came to me and asked if I would be, they didn't say dumb enough, but I think in retrospect it was dumb enough to go. Talked it over with my wife, and I said, this could be an opportunity. It's certainly going to be an experience. And so I went. And
did you feel at the time that it was physically dangerous?
Oh, there was no question. I mean, there was no way not to know that. I started in El Salvador. At one point in time, this is hard to believe, even now it's hard to believe, but we had upwards of 50 people there simultaneously. I mean, I had, 6, 7 crews, 2, 3 correspondents, producers, editors, translators, drivers. I mean, we had a lot of people there, and so did other companies as well, and international news organizations did as well. Those things have changed in the 20, 30 years since.
So enormously, yeah.
But we had a lot of people that were our people. They reported to me. I was responsible for them in every respect. I was obviously responsible for their well-being, for their journalism, for their assignments, for their safety. That was something that I guess in retrospect you would say there's no way to train for that. You either do it or you don't. I guess I did it well enough that they kept me there, and they sent me back several times. I got to be...
Now, when you were down there, would you be conscious of what NBC, ABC, BBC, all those other organizations were putting on the air? Was it competitive in that sense?
Oh my God, yes. I used to joke, but it wasn't a joke, that, there were 50 people on the planet who actually sat there every day watching all 3 networks, but we were among those. Yes, we wanted, and we would hear about it if one of the others had something that we didn't have. And if we hadn't offered that on that particular day, we were in trouble with the bosses.
Was there a risk that you would go too fast or something and get it wrong?
Oh, you always run that risk in journalism. It doesn't have anything to do with war, especially in a competitive situation like television journalism. You're always running the risk that you're going to get it wrong because you're in such a hurry to get it on the air. And unfortunately, it happens way too often. We had certain checks and balances both locally and in New York. There were people who were reading our scripts. It doesn't just go right from your word processor to the air. There are people in between, but you do run the risk that you could get it wrong for sure.
I assume that the area was so small that you would know the people working for NBC, ABC, or whatever.
There's lots of stories about it. It was an intense competition, but it was reasonably friendly. I mean, you would meet people in the restaurant. It was such a small place, and there were so few places that you could really be safe being, that you had to meet your competitors over breakfast, over dinner, in the bar. I'm not a big bar guy, but there are people who go to the bar every night, and you would certainly run into them. And your people would tell you. You would have intelligence from your own staff. Some cameraman would come in and say, well, I heard they were going to go here, or I heard they were going to go there.
So 20 or so years ago, you obviously began to think that you didn't want to do this for the rest of your life. You didn't want to be corporate. Tell us a bit about what led you to, eventually, of course, buying WMRD, WLIS.
Well, the tail end of my time wasn't spent doing wars. I did wars for about 10 years. And then I started doing various corporate work, labor negotiations, and other things like that, which were very different from the experiences that we're just discussing. I enjoyed it, I must say. I'm not trying to argue that I didn't. But I felt like I was coming to the end of what I thought I could contribute in those fields. And in thinking about that, I also was thinking about, okay, I'm at a certain age. I think I still have a good 20 years or so to give in some line of work. What will it be? And I was very lucky, truly, that I had a family that was willing to let me think about that out loud and even to do it. Because certainly when we started with the radio stations, there was no certainty that we were going to be doing it for 16 years. There were plenty of people around here who didn't think we were going to do it for 16 weeks because it's not an easy business.
So explain to me, these radio stations already existed.
They did.
They were on the market. You get a sense that they're for sale. How does that work?
One was on the market. That's the Middletown station, WMRD, which was then called WCNX. It was on the market. The other one, WLIS, which is still WLIS, was not. As I was narrowing in, I was looking at a number of properties all over the country, to be honest, trying to find the right match for me and my skills and the location and all of those things. Price. And
I assume you had to be able to afford it.
Well, I did, and I made a particular judgment that I'm not sorry about, but which narrowed the choices. I did not want anybody to invest in me. Several of my friends and colleagues at CBS, including some people whose names you would know, offered to invest, and I turned them down. Graciously, I hope, but I turned them down. And the reason was I felt if I was going to put money at risk, it ought to be mine.
You didn't want to be beholden.
I didn't want to,
Yeah.
not beholden, I didn't want to put their money at risk. I just didn't want to run the risk that if it didn't work, I'd have to call them up and say, guess what, your money's gone.
Yeah.
So it was only me and the bank. I had less concern about them. I figured they'd know how to protect themselves, and believe me, they do. So I had to find the right combination of things. So I identified the Middletown property. I thought it had potential. It was in bad condition in terms of a business model. And then I thought, well, if I could get the other one and match the two of them together, it would give us the whole of Middlesex County, which was the fastest growing county then as now. And so I had to approach the owners of that station and try to persuade them to sell.
Okay. At that point, we're now talking 16, 17 years ago, was WMRD then larger than LIS, WLIS?
Well,
Was it about the same?
at that point,
terms of
WMRD
listenership, I mean.
was virtually listener-less. It had been in very bad shape with its audience for a long time. There had been an ownership situation that actually turned out to be criminal. My predecessor owner ended up in jail for stealing money from investors. And it was a mess, quite a big mess. And a lot of bad will existed around the area from that ownership. So we had a lot of work, that was the basic reason we changed the call letters, was a lot of folks that I met up here with whom I was talking about the prospect of doing this and asking them about what their, what the reputation of the station was, did not have good things to say about the station. So we made a decision that we would change as much as we could to try to show everybody we were, having a new start.
So as you walked in the door, you're the new owner of WMRD, well, WCNX at the time,
Yep.
WMRD. You're the new owner. You walk in the door. What's the very first thing you did? What's the very first decision you made?
To go 24 hours. The station at the time was only running what's called daytime in the radio business. It was sunrise to sunset. And of course, as you know, that varies month to month through the year, and there are parts of the year when you're on the air only 7 or 8 hours. And I felt that if you wanted to have a serious credibility in the community, you had to go 24 hours. You had to say, we're here. We're here, we're running.
And did you understand at that time how much initially it would cost you?
You never do. I mean, I had an idea, it was more. But I still thought it was the right decision, and I don't regret it.
So presumably in the first year, you were close to broke, personally.
Put it this way, we were certainly running in the red.
You were running in the red. And I'm sure your bank was very aware of that.
They were. They protected themselves, I assure you.
Of course. This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, and we'll be back momentarily. This is Middlesex Moments. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College, and my guest today is Don Decesare, the owner of the station, and we've been talking about how he worked for 20 years for CBS, and then he came to what was then WCNX, now WMRD, about 16 years ago, and how in the first year, of course, it cost you more than you ever expected. And I asked you what was the first thing you did, and you said you went to 24 hours. Mm-hmm. A slightly different question. What's the most significant thing you think you did in your first few years?
Oh, I think that's easy. Reestablish a connection to the community.
How does one do that? You're sitting in a studio, you have call letters. How do you establish? You can't force me to listen to your radio station.
I cannot.
How do you?
Well, you
do
try
that?
to put on the air as much as you can of community interest, from the mundane, the spaghetti supper at the Baptist church, all the way up to news,
Now, please,
public
if
affairs.
you're running a spaghetti supper at a Baptist church, please don't call with complaints that it's mundane. It's not. I know what you mean. All right.
Well, I wasn't going to say trivial. So,
Right.
In fact, oddly, the show that I do twice a week that we call Best of the Valley Shore is an outgrowth of all of that. Because once we reestablished ourselves with the community, we started getting lots of those types of announcements. Lots. Dozens a week. There's many of these things, and of course we serve such a big area, so you've got all these different communities, all these different agencies and churches and civic groups who have important announcements that they want made. And we try to get them on.
So you've been with the station, you've owned the station for 16 years or so. At what point do you think when did you get to the point when people can't afford not to listen to your radio station because there's so much community news?
You'd have to ask
Well,
them.
what's your feeling? When did it begin to flow and you were not anxious anymore and making a little money, I hope?
Well, we're always a little bit anxious, and we're always looking to do better. I mean that quite sincerely. I'm not trying to avoid the question. So I don't know that there was ever a specific individual time when I could say, we finally made it. But I do think that my demonstration of it is I cannot remember, and I'm not being silly about this, I cannot remember the last complaint about our program.
You have a sense how many people listen to?
We do. We have a pretty good idea of it, yes. We're well into the many thousands, depending on time of day and day of week and so on. It varies, of course. And radio, as I like to say, is the opposite of television, meaning morning time up through midday is when we have our largest audience, and then it tends to trail off as the day goes along. And then in the evening, which is prime time for television, the evening is a lower listening time for radio.
What's the effect on your radio station when there are world events going on, say a presidential election just about to finish or a war or something? Do you tend to get less listeners because they're listening to something national, or does it not make much of a difference?
I think with the exception of hugely important news events like 911, for example, our listenership doesn't vary all that much. And what we try to do in the case of important events, presidential elections, or even important news events, is localize as much as we can. Mm-hmm. How does this affect people locally? Are there people locally who are involved in one way or another, either directly or indirectly, in what this event may be? That's what we do.
Well, let's take the morning of 911. You obviously had some very important decisions to make.
Mm-hmm.
Did you keep going with programming? Did you plug into a New York station? Did you listen to stuff on another station on TV perhaps and describe what you were seeing? How did you handle that morning?
First thing we did was we took the commercials off, which a lot of stations did. When you're dealing with an event of that magnitude, an event that has tragedy tied to it and catastrophe tied to it, it just seems to me, to my ears, wrong to be hearing commercials.
Oh, sure.
It just seems wrong, It's not a service to the clients, even though there actually may be more people listening at that given moment because they're trying to get the latest news. It just seems wrong.
Right.
So we took all the commercials off for 3 days. That was the first thing we did. The second thing we did was we went to non-stop news coverage, either from our own resources, and we have some, and from others of our partners, and the big networks made their programming available. If you wanted it, you could put it on. I mean, everybody in the broadcast community came together in that respect. Even though we're competitive and so on, people said, if you need our coverage, put it on. Just credit us and put it on. So we went to 24-hour news coverage is what we did for a couple of days.
And then I assume within a matter of hours, you had people on the phone, on the line, who had a Connecticut or Middlesex County connection or something like that.
We started planning our programming immediately and looking for guests and looking for connections that we could bring to add something to what people were hearing that had a local.
And how long did it take, would you say, before you were back to some kind of normality?
I'm trying to remember.
2 weeks, 1 week?
More like one, I think. We went through a whole week. First with 24-hour news, then we went to our own programming, but at a very muted tone with no music. Then we started to add music back in, but we used music that we thought was appropriate, whether it was celebratory or somber for the occasion, depending on what you were talking about at a given moment. And it was at least a week before we got back to what you would potentially call normal programming. Now,
I assume that among your listeners, obviously, you have young, you have old, you have conservative, you have liberal.
Mm-hmm.
Do you personally editorialize on the air?
Do not.
That's obviously a conscious decision.
Yes.
Talk to me a bit about that.
I decided actually on the way here, so to speak, that my best service to the community would be to let people have access to as many points of view, responsible points of view, as I could.
How do you judge what's responsible?
Oh, that's not that hard.
Really?
If you put a wide variety of people on the air, not every. I'm going to differentiate with you between the word responsible and the word articulate. Some people can be responsible without being articulate, and I suppose the reverse is also true. You can be articulate without being responsible.
Sure.
And if you set a tone, I feel, and I think events have proven this, people fall into it. We do not have wild guests. We don't have wild opinions. Yet we have certainly reflected a broad range of opinions on the station, local opinions.
Are there some pressures out there that tell you if you had wild opinions, wilder guests than me, you would make more money, you'd get more listeners?
Boy, I tell you, that is a tempting thought, and it certainly has, there are people in the industry who might suggest that. We might get more listeners in the short run if we started doing wild things. I think they'd be different people than we have now, because I don't think the people that we have now would be terribly interested in wild things.
Right.
And maybe there would be more of them, maybe there wouldn't, I don't know. But I wouldn't be comfortable. That's something that somebody else needs to do. If that's what they want to do, and there are, by the way, people doing it. So we're not lacking wildness if we want it.
Now, if there's a major local argument about some issue, do you tend to put the two protagonists of each side in a room together and interview them, or do you interview one and then separately interview the other?
You may be surprised by my answer. The answer is I tend to do more of the latter than the former. Meaning, we have certainly put people in the room together and we've had it, sort of a ping pong match.
Yeah.
The problem with that is that everybody is so sophisticated nowadays from a media point of view, even people who don't deal with the media every day, that you tend to get set pieces in those circumstances. I find it's more likely to be illuminating if you just have a conversation, an honest conversation with somebody, and you can play one off the other if obviously someone goes before the other one, but I think more people find out more if they hear each person individually.
Do you sometimes have a hard time keeping your own opinions to yourself?
I don't. I'm proud to tell you that pretty much no one knows what my opinion is. It might be a good thing too, but I don't put my opinion out there.
So we have just a couple of minutes left. You've been owner of this radio station for 16 years. Mm-hmm. What's the single most difficult thing that's ever happened to you on the air?
On the air? I'm not sure I could... difficult. I've certainly misspoken. I've certainly messed up with one button or another from time to time because I like to run my own board, as they say in the business. I don't have someone doing it for me, so I've certainly hit the wrong button plenty of times.
Which means silence out there, or a crash of cymbals,
or the wrong thing playing, or the wrong thing playing over my voice. I've made those kinds of mistakes, but I guess because of the way I do it and the way we've been discussing, I haven't had any embarrassing moments, really.
That's wonderful.
No one run out on me.
So we have 30 seconds. Tell me why Middlesex Community College is such a wonderful resource.
Oh, as you know, I am giving my opinion here. I love this place. I love the concept of this place and the fact that it is really a community college in the sense that there are so many different parts of the community that are here in one way or another as students, either as matriculating students or taking courses for enrichment. And I'm a big endorser of the whole community college concept. So it's just a joy to have this college. Would you send
your own child or grandchild to a community college?
I certainly would. Why not?
Have you ever taken a course at a community college?
I have not, but I have certainly participated in courses.
We can offer to take your tuition right here on the air. Don Decesare, I do want to say how grateful I am to you for your personal support and for your support of the college and for allowing Middlesex Moments its half hour in the sun. This has been Middlesex Moments. My guest has been Don Decesare, owner of WMRD WLIS. Take a look at our website, mxcc.comnet with two M's, comnet.edu. I'm Jonathan Daube, Interim President of Middlesex Community College. Have a good day.